Welcome to lesson 6 of writing an academic essay from start to finish, where we're literally writing an essay together from start to finish. In the last lesson, we put together an outline for our essay topic. In this lesson, research, we're going to develop that outline by finding research to support our arguments. We're going to talk about different types of sources, how to assess reliability and bias, how to integrate research into our essays, and how to organize our research. We're also going to do an activity where we conduct some research together so you can do the same for your own essay. All right, it's time to do some research. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and let's get started. When conducting research, you'll find two main types of sources: primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are original sources produced at the time of an event. Things like diaries, letters, memoirs, speeches, newspaper articles that were released at that time, direct interviews, pictures taken at that time, and recordings also taken at that time. They're like first-hand evidence, which means they can be more personal and subjective. Secondary sources, however, as the name states, are second-hand information. Things like textbooks, biographies, review articles, commentaries, political analyses, literary criticisms, documentaries, and more. Sometimes they interpret or analyze primary sources, and they're usually more neutral and objective. Let's do a quick reflection. When do you think you'd use primary sources, and when do you think you'd use secondary sources? Let me know in the comments. But whether you decide to use primary sources or secondary sources, you want to make sure that your sources are credible. A credible source is a source you can trust. It's accurate, reliable, and backed by evidence. It usually comes from experts and reputable institutions or organizations. They're well researched, they're fact-checked, and they have evidence to support their claims. They're also objective, meaning that they're not biased, which we're going to talk about later. Most importantly, credible sources are verifiable, meaning you can trace the information back to its original source and check the facts for yourself. This chart provides examples of what would be credible, maybe credible, and not so credible sources. For most credible sources, we have academic articles. These are usually peer-reviewed research papers, meaning that other scholars have reviewed them before publication. Next up is government sources. You can usually find some good statistical data on government websites. News articles can also be credible, but you would have to check them for bias depending on their target audience. And finally, things like blogs would be considered the least credible sources because they're usually opinion articles that are based on personal experiences. However, there are many blogs now that are supported by evidence, so always be sure to check the source itself. Going off of that, some lesser credible sources can lead you to more credible sources if you check where they got their information. So I would go to their reference links or their source list if they have one and check what sources they've used and click on those, and you might be led to some more credible sources. Once you've identified a source that you'd like to use, you can evaluate its reliability using the CRAAP test. CRAAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. First up, you want to check the currency of the source. How recently was the source published? Is it outdated? Is the information still applicable today? Next, you want to check its relevance. Does it fit your needs? Does it align with the argument that you're making? It's also important to check for the authority of the author. Are they credible? Are they biased? Are they an expert in the field the source is discussing? Who are they? I would always read up on the author. You also want to check for accuracy. Is the information correct? Are other sources saying the same thing? And finally, check for purpose. Why was the source created? Is there an ulterior motive, an agenda? Was it for research, for science? If you ask yourself these questions, you'll get a better idea of whether the source is reliable and whether it's relevant to the argument that you're making. Now let's do a quick reflection. If you're not an expert in the subject, how can you determine the accuracy of a given source? Let me know in the comments. In addition to checking if a source is reliable, you want to check if the source is biased. Bias is an unfair preference for one position over another. Many news channels are notorious for being biased. So when you're checking your sources, be sure to check for these types of bias. First up, omission. Is the source one-sided and is it missing important information? Next up, sensationalism. This is when a source uses extreme language to get you to have an emotional response. Expediency. Is the source reporting information before all the facts have been checked? Be sure to also check for framing, which is when a source uses language or pictures to frame a topic either positively or negatively. And finally, check if the source has any commercial connections. Is it sponsored? Is there a financial interest involved? Checking for these types of bias will help help you make sure that you're choosing objective resources to support your arguments. But in a quick reflection, let's say you do meet these types of bias. How might you counteract each type in your research? Let me know in the comments. Now that we've spoken about different types of sources and what makes a good, reliable source, let's talk about how to find them. You can use these research tools to help you find some academic articles and government sources, which we agreed were generally the more reliable sources. Google Scholar and ResearchGate are good general databases that include scholarly resources. JSTOR is often used for humanities and social science research. ScienceDirect is often used for scientific and medical research, and PubMed is often used for life sciences and biomedical research. Although there are many other databases like these available online. For government sources, you can check your federal, provincial, and municipal department websites, and local libraries do often contain some government materials. And lucky for us, we live in the era of AI. So AI can recommend sources based on the topic you're researching. It can also help you generate keywords, search terms, and search phrases. And it can help you summarize and analyze sources, but make sure to read the source yourself as well. We do have a free resource list where you can find all of these links and more. It's our resource list for aspiring writers. It's completely free, and you can find the link in the description below. So once we dive into the research process, things can get really messy. You'll have like 1,000 tabs open and you're trying to remember which source was talking about what. And so we need a way to organize our research. Here's a basic research template you can use to help you keep track of all of your sources. Open up a new document, call it research for blah, 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 whatever your essay topic is, and create a table like this for each source. Start with the title of the source and the link so that you know where you got it from and you can go back to it. Then summarize your main points and pick out any useful evidence you'd like to use in your essay. Write a few short notes about how credible you think it is, and if you can find any connections to other sources that you've found. And try and jot down a few questions that you can answer with even more research. It also helps to highlight and color code your research notes. Personally, I like to get the full citation and the in-text citation done as well and put it at the top. We're going to talk about this more in the next lesson though. I also like to put anything that I've taken as a direct quote, like copy pasted in quotation marks, and anything that is paraphrased not in quotation marks. This also helps me keep track of what's not written in my own words. Which leads me to my next two important points: how to integrate quotes in your essay and how to paraphrase them. When you decide to use a source in your essay, you'll either take a quote from that source as it is, copy paste it and integrate it into your essay, or you'll take that quote and you'll paraphrase it into your own words, or you can paraphrase a larger part of the source as well. If you choose to integrate a quote, here's how to do it. First, you want to introduce the quote, and then you want to incorporate the quote. To introduce your quote, you want to provide some context before the quote, meaning you want to build up to the quote. Is there any background information that we need to know about the quote before we read it? Where did you find the quote? Is there something specific we need to know about that article that will help us better understand the quote? Then you want to incorporate your quote, meaning blend it into your writing. You can do this in 3 ways. First, you can introduce it with a short phrase that includes the author or the article. For example, as Nelson Mandela emphasizes, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I like that quote. Here, I've started my sentence with a short phrase introducing the author or the speaker before I've put in my entire quote. Another way to incorporate a quote is by making it a part of the sentence. Here's an example. Nelson Mandela's assertion that education is the most powerful weapon shows its potential in fostering societal change. Here, I've taken just a little part of the quote and integrated it as a part of a larger sentence. The final and most simple way to introduce a quote is using a colon. For example, Nelson Mandela states, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Here, a simple colon did the trick. One thing I want to point out about integrating quotes is to avoid overusing them. Try and directly quote only very, very strong quotes that support your argument, and try not to make them too long. Now let's talk a little bit about paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is restating someone else's work in your own words so that you don't plagiarize. Here are some techniques you can use to paraphrase. First up, and my favorite, we have read and rebuild. Read the text, understand it, close it, and then put it in your own words. This really mitigates the chances of plagiarism and shows that you understand the material as well. Next up, we have restructure, where you can change the sentence structure without it losing its meaning. So you can move words around, whatever maybe the ending phrase was, you can move it to the beginning and so on. In addition to that, you'd want to use synonyms to replace keywords, and you'd want to trim. So leave out any information that's irrelevant to what you're trying to say. Now, the thing about that is if you do all 3 of those, if you restructure, you use synonyms, and you trim, you're kind of reading and rebuilding. So I suggest just trying to read and rebuild. Let's look at an example. Here's my original statement. The speaker's use of humor made the presentation engaging and memorable. If we paraphrase it, we can say something like this. The speaker's jokes kept the audience interested and helped them remember the information. Now, if you're having trouble paraphrasing an idea, you can ask AI to simplify the concept for you or to give you some alternatives for paraphrasing, but be sure that the end result is in your own words. And remember to cite your source and give credit to the author. Let's end this lesson with a research activity where we put all our newfound research skills to use. We're going to use our prompt that we've been using for all our other lessons and conduct some research for it. We're going to pick a source from our research and fill in our research organizer. We have created a free PDF version of this research organizer. Please feel free to grab it. The link is in the description below. All right, let's look at our prompt. Does music positively or negatively impact cognitive functions and mental health? Assess both perspectives and explain your opinion. Whenever you're ready, pause, find a source, fill in the table, and then we'll look at a sample answer together. Okay, here's an example of what this template would look like filled in. I have the title of my source here, which I've linked, which is why it's underlined. I summarized the main points of the article. I directly quoted some useful evidence that I think I could use in my essay, which is why I put it in quotation marks. I decided that my source is credible because it's a peer-reviewed journal article. I noticed that it does align with other studies on the same topic, and I put in a question that I might want to look more into. If you'd like, you can pause and give this an in-depth read. Okie dokie, that was all for research, so I'm gonna let you go off and do research for your own essay and try to build on your outline a little bit more. And next time we're going to talk about citations. We're going to go in depth on how to cite our sources and how to format our essays. So make sure you have some research ready so we can practice. Remember, you can grab the complete writing and academic essay bundle, which includes all of the slides that we use in the series and any additional resources that we're using as well. The link is in the description below. For some extra support, you can always book a tutoring class. The link is also in the description below. All right, I'll leave you to your research and I'll see you next time.